from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, another Trump-perceived political enemy gets indicted by the Justice Department. The DOJ charging former National Security Advisor John Bolton over his handling of classified documents following the president's call for his prosecution. This is the latest in a growing spate of investigations into the president's perceived enemies, and we will have the latest up ahead.
Plus, a second Trump-Putin meeting in the works. The president of the United States saying he would hold a second meeting with Vladimir Putin within, quote, 2 weeks in Hungary, a meeting aimed at ending the war in Ukraine.
The comments from the president just moments ago following his 2-hour call with Putin earlier today. What it could mean for the war, a potential ceasefire, and what happens next when Michael Allen, former National Security Council official in the Bush administration, joins us.
The government shutdown now on the cusp of becoming the fourth longest shutdown in U.S. history as both Democrats and Republicans stick to their respective sides. We'll discuss what, if any, room there is for compromise.
When Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas joins us.
Also tonight, the S&P marks its worst month since March as twin regional banks get hit, making Wall Street sputter where things stood at the close coming up.
And the presidential unveiling that could change the D.C. skyline just in time for America's 250th anniversary. The details of what's being dubbed the Arc de Triomphe up ahead. But we begin with breaking news this evening, with the Justice Department charging John Bolton, a former national security advisor to President Trump, who became one of his fiercest critics, according to a person familiar with the matter. The president commenting on this development just moments ago.
I think he's, a bad person. I think he's a bad guy. Yeah, he's a bad guy. It's too bad, but that's the way it goes.
The case against him?
That's the way it goes, right? That's the way it goes. Will I what?
Have you reviewed the case against him?
No, I haven't. But I just think he's a bad person.
Bolton was indicted by a federal grand jury in Maryland for his handling of classified documents, said the person who asked not to be identified, discussing the charges, which have not clearly been made public. Joining us now with the latest, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, who is live from the White House North Lawn. Kate, the president told us this was coming. Here we are.
Here we are, that's right. So John Bolton is now the third high-profile Trump political opponent to be indicted in less than a month. As you mentioned, he was indicted by a federal grand jury in Maryland over his handling of classified documents. Bolton was, of course, Trump's national security advisor in his first term, which makes this all the more stunning. He's since been a very fierce critic of the president. He said in his memoir that he thought Trump was unfit to be president. He's spoken out against him numerous times. But this indictment comes, just weeks after indictments against Jim Comey and Letitia James. After Comey was indicted, Trump suggested that there were more people his administration were targeting, clearly part of a retribution campaign that, as you mentioned, Trump has been signaling for a long time now.
A lot happening today when President Trump spoke. He also detailed what he called a lengthy conversation with Vladimir Putin today. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the White House is really trying to jumpstart these negotiations between Ukraine and Russia again. These talks had really been stalled since Trump and Putin met in Alaska in August. But, Trump just spoke about this phone call. Let's hear what he had to say.
I thought it was a very good phone call. I thought very productive. But I'll be meeting with President Putin, and we'll make a determination. Tomorrow I'm meeting with President Zelensky, and I'll be telling him about the call. We're going to be meeting in Hungary. Viktor Orban is going to be hosting, and it's really something that's time. Last week, over 7,000 people were killed. That's ridiculous.
Bit more information. So Trump said that next week top U.S. and Russian officials are going to meet. So that those talks are going to be led on the U.S. side by Marco Rubio. We don't know exactly what day that's happening or where that is happening. But then, as we just heard, Trump and Putin have agreed to meet in Budapest in Hungary. I think the timing of this meeting will depend on how these lower level talks go. There could be more than just one. But certainly, big sticking points remain still in these talks with Ukraine and Russia over territories, what security guarantees Ukraine might get. So we'll see how these talks go next week.
Kate, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan reporting live from the North Lawn of the White House this evening, as we are now joined in our Washington bureau for a look into the significance of the Bolton news, the impending Trump-Putin meeting, and more questions about the administration's operations in Venezuela. Michael Allen, Managing Director, Partner, Beacon Global Strategies, also former National Security Council official in the George W. Bush administration. Michael, it's great to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You're clearly here to talk about a lot. It's been another busy day on this front, and I just want to start with this John Bolton news, because I believe you guys had a chance to serve together in the first
Bush administration.
In the Bush administration, and I do wonder if this enemies list is something that you see in the way that it's being described as one of retribution, or if John Bolton is up to something else here.
Well, I think we're going to have to see the indictment. I'm sure it's being released as we speak, and really try and make a determination of whether it's flimsy or it's not. At first, it definitely seems part of a vendetta campaign, but there was New York Times reporting maybe a month or so ago that some of this began under the Biden administration, when we were able to intercept classified information from one of our adversaries who had hacked John Bolton's email and had those emails in their possession. And so it arose some career officials' concerns that those emails might have been classified. So I think that's how things got started. If they got started from a place of national security, from civil servants, it might be different than if it originated in the White House.
I see.
So you know John Bolton. So we saw how President Trump reacted today. I'm curious how you think John Bolton reacted to this. He obviously must have expected it, but how you think he reacted to it.
Well, he's a fierce competitor and critic of the president. I think he's probably receiving this defiantly. He's, of course, going to say that it's politically motivated, just like as he would say what else Trump has been doing of late. So I think he's a formidable lawyer in his own right, and he'll have great representation, and I think he's going to fight this ferociously.
Let's talk about the meeting, not just the one today, but the one tomorrow. Donald Trump ended up on the phone for 2 hours with Vladimir Putin today. Interesting. And he had suggested he was going to float this idea of tomahawks going to Ukraine if he didn't end the war. I'm not getting a sense from the president's writings that that happened. Now we've got a meeting of their lieutenants that will apparently take place next week. Secretary of State will be there, and he writes, President Putin and I will then meet in an agreed-upon location. Kate just mentioned Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring this inglorious war to an end. So we're going to Viktor Orban's backyard for another meeting with no promising in advance. There's no agenda to set the stage for this meeting. Does Putin deserve it?
I don't think so. There's no evidence yet that he's willing to compromise whatsoever. As best we can tell, Putin continues to let this war drag on. He believes he might be making progress. It's albeit incremental progress against the Ukrainians. He wants to achieve on the battlefield the complete conversion of four Ukrainian provinces into Russia. If he feels like he can get that at the negotiating table, all the better for him, and that's probably why he wants to engage with Donald Trump. I think Trump is on a journey, if you will. He's trying to think, how, in his own words, do I get Putin not to, quote, tap me along, and how do I get him to be serious about this? I think that's why he did the tariffs on India for oil, and that's why he's flirting with the idea of the Tomahawk missiles.
I'm curious how this meeting with President Trump will affect the meeting with President Zelensky. President Trump sits down with him tomorrow. Does it basically negate almost anything they discuss when 3 weeks later he turns around and then he meets with President Putin?
It is going to be strange if the president commits absolutely to new weaponry like the Tomahawks and then says, but I'm going to see Putin later, because then you would think that, well, Putin's just going to have that erased somehow in the meeting. So it is a bit curious, the timing of it all and how it's all coming together. I hope the president realizes that the reason he may be getting new attention from Vladimir Putin is that Trump has been using pressure to get Vladimir Putin to the table, not just with sanctions, but, of course, dangling out there the idea of more long-range precision strike. Because if anything's changed of late inside of Russia, it's the targeting of these refineries from afar, and they're 20% off their usual production rate on oil.
Interesting. The president today talking about oil, but with regard to India. Let's listen to what he said.
If India doesn't buy oil, it makes it much easier. And they're not going to buy. They assured me they will. Within a short period of time, they will not be buying oil from Russia. And they'll go back to Russia after the war's over.
That was in the Oval Office yesterday, to be clear. Is that why this meeting took place? Vladimir Putin heard that India was going to stop buying Russian oil?
I think in part. I mean, Vladimir Putin, of course, is trying to make sure that an anvil doesn't fall on his head. Yeah. And if he thinks he can make some progress by calling Donald Trump directly, dangling sorts of ideas, I think he's going to go for it. But yeah, I think the president wants to go for the jugular on oil. That's why he moved out on India with tariffs. He has not gone so far with China. I hope he's interested in doing that in the future. But it's definitely a carrot and stick approach from President Trump. And at times, it's hard to totally discern what tactic he's using.
And with all this going on, the president has said that he has authorized covert action in Venezuela. I mean, we saw videos, we showed them yesterday, of bombing of ships. What is your reaction to this?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, covert action is supposed to be secret and never to acknowledge the hand of the United States of America. So I think when we're constantly blowing up alleged drug boats down there, that maybe that's the military part of the equation. He did reference mysteriously that they need to start doing things on land. And maybe that's where he's asked the Central Intelligence Agency, which has a paramilitary force, which is excellent at training local forces to combat drugs or terrorism or whatever the case may be. Maybe that's what he means. That's usually encompassed under a broad definition of covert action. So that could be what he's after, or other activities to otherwise destabilize Maduro's regime.
To your point, Michael, kind of interesting to hear the White House confirm a covert operation. The press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, was asked about it earlier. Here's what she said.
Yeah.
There should be no surprise for this. The president campaigned on using every lever of power to go after the drug cartels who have been trafficking illicit poison into our country for far too long. I think President Trump believes that Nicolas Maduro is an illegitimate president leading an illegitimate regime that has been trafficking drugs to the United States of America for far too long, and we're not going to tolerate it.
So we're just having this conversation out loud. Or do we have CIA agents mapping targets? Are we planning to strike inside Venezuela? Where do you go from here?
I think that the president has probably ordered Southcom in the Department of Defense, the combatant commander, to outline some targets for them. I think what the CIA role would be, are there any friendlies inside that can report on the activities inside of the regime? What are the regime's weaknesses? And probably some direct training in a clandestine way.
Fascinating. Stay in touch with us on this one, because it sounds like they're just digging in. Michael Allen is Managing Director, Partner, Beacon Global Strategies. Michael, thank you for the insights. And tonight's stock slid, extending a week-long stretch of volatility that has seen the S&P 500 mark its worst month since March. Today's slide due to a plunge in a pair of regional banks, underscoring the fragility of a $28 trillion bull market. Shares of Zions Bancorp, Western Alliance plunging the entire financial sector after both banks disclosed problems with loans involving alleged fraud. The renewed bank volatility coming after the collapse of subprime auto lender Tricolor Holdings that hit giant J.P. Morgan, prompting Jamie Dimon to warn, quote, "When you see one cockroach, there are probably more," a quip some of his non-bank rivals have taken as a shot at them.
Coming up, China's decision to unveil export controls on rare earths has sparked a global pushback. We'll bring you the details up ahead. But first, the government shutdown has reached day 16 without progress on Capitol Hill. We'll speak with Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas about what's next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Starting tomorrow, Monday at the latest, we're not going to be able to pay those workers. If that continues on for long, they may get other jobs. They're going to stop their efforts to modernize our nuclear weapons to guarantee the sovereignty of our country.
Secretary
That's not
Wright?
something we should mess around with.
Are you saying you are furloughing
Yes.
employees at the National Nuclear Security Administration, which keeps our nuclear stockpile in check?
We have not furloughed anyone yet, but we will be out of funds by the tomorrow or early next week.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. And what now? That was Energy Secretary Chris Wright this morning, stopping us in our tracks as he spoke with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern on Bloomberg Surveillance. The troubling fact that staffers in the nuclear stockpile program will soon be furloughed if the shutdown continues. You heard him right. Now, with the shutdown on the precipice of becoming the fourth longest in U.S. history, what is so unique about this situation? For details, we turn now to Bloomberg's Laura Davison, who joins us in our Washington bureau. Laura, it's great to see you. The furloughs are going to start hitting home with more time. Paychecks are going to remain an issue once we apparently get through this current cycle. Even military paychecks would presumably lapse. At what point are the walls closing in on lawmakers that will put them in the same room?
It's usually about that 2 paycheck time period. So basically about a month into a shutdown. That's what we saw in 2019. And when both, you started to see absenteeism at airports for air traffic controllers and TSA agents. And that's when people really kind of hit that crisis moment. They had a rent payment due and it had gone, a full month without getting paid. It's really interesting because this shutdown has been both bigger and smaller than previous shutdowns. It's been much smaller because there's actually far fewer people furloughed than there have been in previous times. But you have sort of what Trump and Russ Vought at the White House have been doing in terms of firing workers, laying them off, pulling back funds, canceling program funds that mean that the effect from this shutdown may last a lot longer than previous ones.
Laura, there are some reports that senators are talking right now, that they're at least having some small conversations. What are you hearing about that, and do you think that's going anywhere?
So far, these have gone nowhere. These are casual conversations among a handful of senators, but they don't even have the buy-in of their leadership in the Senate or the buy-in of the House. And that's really where the issue is. If you've got, a handful of senators who see a way out, they see something that they might want to do, but they just don't have the trust and sort of the momentum to get this done. And as we've seen, when there hasn't been sort of a big, forcing action, whether there be chaos at the airports or, suddenly lots of people defaulting on car loans or home loans, that it's not enough pressure to get lawmakers to act.
Laura Davison, great to have you with us on a very busy day. That's Bloomberg's Laura Davison. And now for an inside view of this shutdown, we turn to Democratic Congresswoman and Chief Deputy Whip Sharice Davids of Kansas. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be here.
You just heard what Laura had to say. It sounds like there may be some conversations, but the shutdown does not appear to be moving anywhere. What do you think is the boiling point here?
Well, I wish that the boiling point would have just been to not get into this place at all. A government shutdown is a catastrophic event, and it is also completely avoidable. I am encouraged to see that there could be some conversations that are happening between various members, both on the House side and the Senate side. But at the end of the day, as a member of the House, I can tell you that Speaker Mike Johnson failing to call us into session and really not coming to the table at all it's a dereliction of duty. We owe it not just to our federal workforce, but also to the American people to get the government back open. And, I spent time this morning talking to some of the federal employees in the Kansas City metro area. There's about 30,000 of them. And the frustration, the anxiety is through the roof. And, these folks just want to do their jobs. They just want to help serve the American people, whether that's at the Social Security Administration, the VA, or at HUD.
Congresswoman, as you just said, you spoke to furloughed workers today, and you said that they are frustrated. But when you say that they're frustrated, are they frustrated that there is a shutdown? Are they frustrated at one side? Or are they simply just frustrated that the lawmakers can't agree on this and they're not making any money?
I'm going to go with all of the above. When I talked to folks today, some of the frustration was literally that, these are real people we're talking about. There are real lives being impacted. And yes, that's our government employees, but they're also talking to people on Medicare, people who need cancer treatment, people who need their Social Security benefits. They're frustrated at being treated like political pawns in a fight when they're really just trying to show up and do their work every single day. Again, I don't think I can say this enough, that I truly believe that Mike Johnson is, this is a dereliction of duty. He needs to call us back into session.
Well, let's hear from Mike Johnson, Congresswoman, because I can hear your frustration, and he says that he's frustrated with you. The Speaker spoke to reporters earlier today. Let's hear what he said.
They have offered no plan. They have offered no strategy. They have offered no common sense path forward for ending this situation. And so many of you have asked all of us, how will it end? We have no idea. It's up to the Democrats, and they have to decide it. And judging by their outrageous behavior, the Democrats appear perfectly happy to keep the political theater going while real people suffer.
I don't know how you react to the political theater concept, Congresswoman, but you were with some real federal workers who are not taking part in theater today.
Yeah, it's really rich for someone who is the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives to blame the minority party. It is a fact that Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House. The Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, and they control the White House. They have refused to show up in good faith and engage in bipartisan negotiations. And I would go so far as to say that Mike Johnson is lying. He is not showing up. He's not making efforts to try to get us back into session. We need bipartisan.
He's lying about whether you're talking with him or not, or what's he lying about, Congresswoman?
About the political, I mean, this idea that it is somehow the Democrats' fault, when really what we need is bipartisanship. We need a speaker who is willing to actually bring us back into session. Mike Johnson canceled votes in the couple of days leading up to the government shutdown and has refused to call us back into session so that we can actually try to put something in front of lawmakers where we can get the government open. And again, this is real. These are real people. I'm not sure how many of my colleagues, the Speaker included, know what it means to miss a paycheck, but the idea of missing a paycheck. My mom was in the Army for 20 years, enlisted, and she worked at the Postal Service for 20 years. She raised me and my two brothers by herself. And the idea of missing even one paycheck would have been catastrophic. We could have lost our home. We could have not had food on the table. And that's the reality for so many federal employees right now. And to try to pretend as if there's political gamesmanship going on from the Speaker who has refused to do his job and bring us back into session it's outrageous.
Congresswoman, I'm sure likely you've heard the news now about John Bolton indicted today. I'm curious your feelings on if the president does target political rivals, what is the recourse? Is the court the only recourse?
The court is absolutely one of the recourses. I do have to say that the fact that we have someone who, I mean, no one should be targeted by the President of the United States with the full force of the Department of Justice. No one who is an American who has served their country and who I might disagree with John Bolton on all kinds of things, but the president should never be using the justice system to attack enemies or allies in this way. And of course, the court system is absolutely one of the areas that we should have as a backstop. And it should also be that we have a president who follows the rule of law and doesn't try to use their position. No politician should be using their position to go after political enemies.
Congresswoman, appreciate your time. Come see us when you get back to Washington. Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas. We thank you for being with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, China's decision to unveil export controls on the rare earth supply chain, sparking global pushback, but also an opportunity for the U.S. to win over allies. We're going to bring you the details next, right here alongside Julie Fine. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Julie Fine. President Trump making a big announcement on lowering IVF prices at the White House in just the last hour. And now we have breaking news out of the FDA, a pilot program introducing national priority vouchers awarded to 9 recipients that make products the government believes to have potential to address key priorities for this administration. We have a lot to break down now. Joining us is the man with the plan, Dr. Marty Makary, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, live from the White House North Lawn. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Julie and Joe.
Let's first begin with the announcement you made about IVF today. Can you explain in detail how many more people you think this will help?
Yeah, first of all, Julie, this is a promise kept by the president when he said he wanted to make IVF more accessible and lower the price. And what we have today is an announcement that directly affects 1 in 8 American couples that may be struggling with infertility and seeking treatment. It's very expensive, as you know, and part of it is the cost of the medications. So these reforms announced today are directly going to lower the price and cut the price in half for one of the medications, and for another medication that sells for $242, it'll now be about $10. We made the announcement with the CEO of the pharmaceutical company, EMD Serrano, and this is part of the most favored nation status pricing that the president has been demanding of pharmaceutical companies. Infertility has also been a massive priority, which is why part of the announcement is now there will be a legal pathway to create an infertility benefit that's enhanced that employer-sponsored health care plans can now offer their employees.
How long do you think it will take to implement this? There seem to be a lot of moving parts and a lot of different parts here. So how long do you think people will feel the help?
Well, the reduction in price for the existing medications will kick in immediately, but the new medication that the company has, which will increase competition in the marketplace and be offered at a lower competitive price, this is a medication called Pergoveris. It is now the recipient of a national priority voucher by the FDA, whereby we're going to get a decision out in weeks, and we're doing this now for potentially promising therapies that are in line with our national priorities. So the medication is not yet approved, but it could be as soon as a matter of months from now when that medication could be approved by the FDA at that low price.
And Doctor, this is one of many, right? The national priority vouchers are out today. We understand there are 9 vouchers so far. Which companies, other companies, or other drugs are we talking about?
Yeah, this is an exciting day. We announced the first batch. In a matter of weeks, we're going to announce another batch, and we're going to keep going. This is a pilot program to take the review time at the FDA down from a year to a matter of weeks. And we think we can do it. We've met with the scientists. We've been working on the workflow and operations ever since I came into office 6 months ago. We believe we can cut the red tape and reduce the idle time when the applications are not getting reviewed and convene people rather than farm out the pieces of the application around the agency. So the recipients that we announced are medication for diabetes called teplizumab. This is a medication made by Sanofi. There's one called cytisinicline. This is for nicotine addiction. DB-OTO just had a New England Journal of Medicine article come out last week with amazing results for the 1 to 3% of children with congenital deafness that have a certain gene mutation. Some of those kids got normal hearing from this amazing gene therapy. This is an exciting treatment. We're not taking a passive role at the FDA. We're talking to the reviewers. We're going down in the pipeline. We're asking the reviewers on the front lines, are you seeing anything that's amazing? And if we do, we're calling the companies and we're moving them to the front of the line. Another treatment is for pancreatic cancer, something I've treated a lot in my career at Johns Hopkins. Now, it's a subset of patients with pancreatic cancer. It is a potentially promising treatment. Augmentin, made by U.S. Antibiotics. It will be made in the United States, and domesticating manufacturing is a part of our national priority. It's domesticating national manufacturing as a national priority issue, meeting a large unmet public health need, or equalizing prices to make them more affordable for the everyday Americans. A treatment for vampires disease by children, by disc medicine, and ketamine, which is a critical medication used in general anesthesia, and it will be made in the United States by a company named Flow Corporation. This is the beginning of a series of products that will be getting a priority review because they're in line with our national priorities that we've outlined.
Doctor, thank you for joining us. We appreciate that, and we'd like to learn a lot more about it as this is implemented. Dr. Marty Makary, Commissioner of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, live at the White House this evening. As we turn now to trade, after the president yesterday confirmed that he sees the U.S. in a trade war with China, raising the potential of a sustained trade war ahead. Now, China's decision to unveil export controls on the rare earth supply chain has sparked a global pushback, with the U.S. and other countries forming a potential coalition to respond. Joining us now for a closer look, Bloomberg's Dan Flatley with us here in our Washington bureau. Dan, here we go again, and we're only weeks away from a meeting, supposedly, between these two presidents?
That's right, Joe. Yeah, 2 weeks, actually, in South Korea at the end of the month, which is what we've been anticipating. As of yesterday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said it's still a go. So, you know, we're operating under that assumption. But obviously, tensions are sort of ratcheting up ahead of that meeting. That's not uncommon. I mean, you've seen this in, you know, previous rounds of these trade negotiations. This is a little bit different, though, because we're back to where we were prior to the London talks earlier this year with this rare earths issue. And this is really a key point of leverage for China, for sure.
So if we're back to where we were, what do you make of the odds of this meeting really happening? With the tension where it is right now, do you think they'll throw their hands up, or do you think they'll really sit down? Scott Bessent, of course, said he believes that they will. That was as of yesterday. We know how quickly things change.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, yesterday we didn't know that Trump and Putin were going to meet at some point. You know, it's very quickly moving. I think that the odds, Julie, to your point, are still pretty good, I'd have to say, just because my understanding and my reporting shows that President Trump still wants to meet with his counterpart, Xi Jinping. I believe that the Chinese want a resolution to this. You see, actually, if you kind of read between the lines, some signaling on both sides to kind of bring the tensions down. I think somebody put it to me the other day, which I thought was a smart point, that you have almost the two bureaucracies in both countries still clashing. They're still operating under this mode of, you know, we're at war. We're in a trade war. We're in some sort of a sensitive materials war, where you have the two leaders that want to get a deal done. So I think Bessent would say that it's the tone from the top that will carry us forward here.
With the tone from the top, Dan Flatley, thank you so much, Dan, for your read on this. And for more on the state of global trade, we turn now to Anna Rosenberg, the head of Geopolitics at Amundi Asset Management, who joins us live from our Mexico City bureau. It's great to have you with us. Do you agree with Donald Trump? Are we in a trade war with China? Is that what we call it now?
I think we are already in an economic war. That's not just between the U.S. and China, but other countries too. Yes, I think we are in what I would say an economic war. And there are many parties, not just the U.S. and China.
I'm curious, because where you sit right now, when you look at trade wars, we're talking about the U.S. and China, but let's talk about Mexico President Claudia Sheinbaum. She has seemed to make a relationship with President Trump, and it hasn't affected trade as much. Is that really the example that other countries should be looking at?
Well, it really depends on where you are with your economic relationship with the U.S., right? Mexico very much depends on the trade relationship and the economic partnership with the U.S. That is really different in different parts of the world. Like, the reason why China can now flex its muscles when it comes to rare earths is because simply they have the upper hand here, and the tariffs are not longer what scares China. On the European Union side, for example, again, it is important for the European Union to have a good trade relationship with the U.S., primarily because the European Union is dependent on U.S. security in regards to Russia, Ukraine. So what I'm saying here is that every country has a different incentive. Some are much more dependent on the U.S., like Mexico here is, for example. Brazil isn't, right? Brazil can have relationships with China and the U.S. They are trying to hatch their relationships in this great power competition and the multipolar world that we're living in.
Well, you know, obviously China is dependent on the U.S. to a great extent as well. But the Sheinbaum playbook, I'm guessing, is not the one that President Xi is going to be using. Is this the other side of the pole here? Is this the other pole when it comes to President Xi, strongman, when he's approaching Donald Trump?
So look at how the U.S.-China relationship has evolved, right? For China, a continuation of the status quo in terms of global trade is the best deal, because the economic growth is fueled by export. They do not want economic friction because of global trade. However, what we have seen is that the confidence, Xi's confidence on the global stage has been growing steadily over the last couple of years and months. And now, for the first time in a serious way, China is using its leverage over rare earths on a global level. They are no longer willing to be the ones that always chicken out in the game of chicken, if you will. And that increases the risk. And I think that this is something that the US administration has maybe overplayed. Clearly, I would agree in the sense that there is interest on both sides that this doesn't escalate, but that they will stay in what we call a tense understanding scenario, because China depends on global trade flowing and the US depends on Chinese rare earths. So the most likely is that the rhetoric will calm down a little bit and that eventually they stay in this tense understanding scenario. I do not expect, however, that we see a grand new deal like a phase 2 trade deal in this context, because trust is very low. And as I said earlier, China is no longer willing to be the one that bows.
And now they're dealing with the back and forth over rare minerals as well. That's in this mix, too.
Absolutely. And this is really quite critical, because the world is dependent on China's rare earths. And the thing here is there is plenty of rare earths all over the world, but the mining of it is dirty business, and many countries are reluctant to do it. And so for now, the dependency on China is huge, and there has not been meaningful diversification. There are some incentives to try and diversify away from Chinese rare earths, but for now, that has really not yielded a lot of results. So we have seen China curtail the export of rare earths also to the European Union, where germanium, for example, is down 60% year on year. They're really using this as a tool to increase power on a global stage.
Anna Rosenberg, head of geopolitics at Amundi Asset Management, thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
And coming up, we'll turn back to our conversation on the ongoing shutdown with our political panel, and we'll bring you details about President Trump's latest D.C. construction project. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Julie Fine. We'll turn back to the ongoing shutdown in a moment, but first, here are the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. The Department of Justice has now indicted John Bolton, a former national security advisor of President Trump, who has now become one of his fiercest critics. The U.S. Attorney's Office sought charges on Bolton's handling of classified documents after the FBI found items marked confidential, secret, and classified during a search of his office in August. The documents allegedly contained information about weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. mission to the UN, and plans for government strategic communications. Bolton is denying all allegations.
The U.S. District Judge now says federal immigration officers in Chicago must wear body cameras, summoning a senior official to court next week to discuss the enforcement operation underway in the area. According to the Associated Press, more than 1,000 arrests have already been made since September. District Judge Sarah Ellis said she had concerns about her order being followed, while an attorney for the DOJ said it would not be possible to immediately hand out the body cams.
Plus, potential economic tea leaves from Fed Governor Christopher Waller. Waller spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations in an event moderated by Bloomberg's Tom Keene and spoke about how the central bank is looking at inflation when making policy decisions.
Why are you lowering rates? So you have to say, what is the outlook for inflation? And that's what I've argued, that any tariff effects are going to be temporary. You look, this is a classic line in central banking. You look through those things. You think about what is going to be inflation 12 months from now, not when the next 12 months. So that's what I'm doing. And in that world, I see inflation coming back down to target. I see a softening labor market. So I want to bring things back to target.
And it's being dubbed the Arc de Trump by Donald Trump, the potential new addition to the D.C. skyline that was unveiled by the president last night. You might have heard about this. He showed it off, a little model at a White House event in which he praised business executives for their donations to White House ballroom construction, prompting ethics alarm bells to ring in Washington. The administration says the Arch project would celebrate America's 250th anniversary next year and would be built across from the Lincoln Memorial, across the bridge over near Arlington National Cemetery. The models ranging in size of small, middle, and large. He did present 3 of them. The president says he prefers the large one. And when a reporter asked who the arch was for, Trump commented, quote, "Me. It's going to be beautiful," unquote. But it's the big story involving former National Security Advisor John Bolton now being indicted by the Justice Department that kicks off tonight's panel. Joining us now with their reaction to this story and a lot more today, Democratic strategist Jim Kessler, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way, and Republican strategist Rob Waters, the managing partner at the Madison Group, is back with us at the table. And gentlemen, it's great to see you both.
Thank you.
Welcome. As much
and
as
Jim,
I want
it's good
to
see you after so many years.
Well,
a long time.
Well, you got history. You just found out you got history. That's right.
You thought we were going to talk about Arc to Trump, but we're going to start with John Bolton here because the list of enemies, political enemies, is being methodically gone through here when you consider who we've already seen, right? Jim Comey, Letitia James, now John Bolton. Is Adam Schiff next?
Probably. And look, I think like who now in national security hasn't taken top secret documents home? The president,
but you're not
former
supposed
vice president. Of course you're not supposed to. I'm just kind of making a joke about it. But look, I do feel like the John Bolton situation aside, we'll see how it plays out, how real it is. This feels like the Department of Vengeance, not the Department of Justice. And it does seem like Trump is going after his enemies. You saw that it was supposed to be a DM to Pam Bondi. He ended up posting it there. Like, is this criminal justice system, is it for the people or is it for Donald Trump? I think that's a legitimate question for people to ask.
With that being said, John Bolton obviously knew this was coming. There had been whispers about it for some time. But if you're somebody that has tangled with the president in the past, what's going through your mind today?
Well, I'm going to say if you're the National Security Advisor, you shouldn't have these documents at your house. You're well aware of what the Espionage Act is. You're well aware of what's classified. Why aren't we talking about, documents, albeit not in a garage, in his office, that shouldn't have been there?
How about in the bathroom?
Wherever.
Well, this was the thing at Mar-a-Lago, right?
Yeah.
It does seem like it's a case that seems to be going around.
We have got to do a better job of securing our national security documents, and I think that should be the overriding thought right now.
If Adam Schiff is next.
For mortgage fraud for his house in Maryland?
That's what they're saying, yeah. Well, I mean, look, we've been through this with Lisa Cook now and others, but does that change the way you look at these? Do you start to connect the dots in terms of retribution?
I mean, I would say Letitia James being elected, and her first thing that she said is Donald Trump is, I'm going to indict him, without any advanced knowledge or any due diligence. I mean, come on, it goes on both sides.
Wow, so she deserves to be indicted for indicting.
I would like to think jurisprudence works a better way.
Mm-hmm.
How long does this go? I mean, how long? Is this something we're going to see the next 4 years? How long
and just another 3 years and 2 months. I mean, that's what we're
going
to see.
You're going to have the timeline wrong.
I mean, look, I really feel this is more like the Department of Vengeance and scores to settle. And let's just take the mortgage fraud cases that are out there. Like, are we going to have that same standard for every single person or just people that Donald Trump feels like these are his enemies? And if justice is blind, it should be for everyone, which means our jails are going to need to be a lot larger because I think there's probably a lot of mortgage fraud cases like that out there.
I heard there was an island
and
for
shouldn't
that.
be, since we're there. Mm-hmm. There should not be mortgage fraud.
Right.
Which we all agree on.
Agree. The question is, are we looking through records in every single place, and now that we've got artificial intelligence and the ability to do this, in every single place and saying, like, here are my 5,000 enemies out there. Find something on them that they did wrong. And we were just talking outside about drinking during our college age. We've done something wrong, too. Everybody's got something somewhere, either advertent or inadvertently, that they've done wrong. There's a lot of laws in this country. Yeah. So, like, who are we going to go after and why, and what tools are we going to use? And I just think this is a retribution age. I understand Trump is angry, and maybe he's got some reasons to feel this way, but that's what it feels like.
But do you feel that, do you really think he's directing the DOJ to do this?
Yes.
And you think the DOJ is just listening and saying this, taking it off one by one?
How can you come to any other conclusion? I mean, there was the DM that was supposed to be private to Pam Bondi. Like, this is a different DOJ. So I do think Americans should feel concerned about this. I don't think they most do, because it's not going to affect them directly, but I think Americans should feel concerned.
I'll tell you, if the drinking indictments come, there's not going to be much left of Washington. But I want to turn to the shutdown, which is causing some to drink here at this point. I think on day 16, I did see them bringing the pizza and wine in a couple of nights ago when the nominations were voted on. But we'll be serious here for a minute, because Chuck Schumer is obviously being targeted by Republicans, and he keeps blaming Republicans, and we're going around this echo chamber. Listen to what the Democratic leader in the Senate had to say today.
Let's be clear. Republicans are demanding something that hasn't happened in previous negotiations. They're saying our way or the highway. No negotiation, no Democratic input. This is a highly partisan bill. And they want us to pass this partisan CR that has zero bipartisan inputs, zero conversation, and frankly, zero relief for so many Americans who are afflicted by the health care crisis.
The rhetoric is interesting, Rob Waters, because that very partisan bill he's talking about was a Biden budget.
Yeah, it's
that
a clean
Democrats
CR.
voted for.
I know.
Republicans didn't like
I know.
a year ago.
It's the same thing.
How do we diffuse this?
Well, one, we let them have their No Kings rally this weekend. You know, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democratic Senate, make sure that he's not primaried from the left, from AOC and the radical liberals that he is so afraid of, which we know. And then the adults sit down and say, hey, we have a clean CR. We have to protect the subsidies, because we understand that funds Medicare in many states, and many governors want this. They come to a deal and we get out of here.
Republican governors lead us to the path to freedom. You are, by the way, of course, a former aide and close confidant of Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, I agree. I think I feel we're going to have a deal. We know what the parameters are. It's going to be the ACA subsidies and some of the Medicaid pieces. It's health care. Democrats, Schumer and others laid out, this is what we want. This is one of those 80-20 issues where Democrats have the rare advantage on it. Donald Trump signaled when he was in the White House, something needs to be done on health care. I just think this is going to get done. When it gets done, I'm not really sure, but I think it will get done.
Will the arc to Trump get done? Will the arc to Trump get done?
Oh, I mean, you guys take the bait, don't you?
He's going to build that thing, along with the ball.
Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Who appropriates it?
Great question, unless it's privately funded like the ballroom. That's
where
we're going,
right? Hey, saving dollars wherever we can.
It looked like the Stonehenge from Spinal Tap when he was holding it up there.
11?
So yeah, I think we turn it up to 11 and we put that thing down and we play some music.
If you're with us on Bloomberg Radio, I wish you could see the images of Donald Trump holding up the models of the Arc de Trump. He had the ballroom construction crew use their 3D printer to crank these out. He's going to reshape the skyline by the time he's done, Jim Kessler. Are you looking forward to it?
Well, I do think Washington could always use a little bit of a facelift.
That's right.
I would like to see the troops gone, and I'll exchange that for a better skyline. I'm always in favor of D.C.
I would be delighted. Right. We were built by a Frenchman. And that explains our bridges and traffic.
All right.
Let's have one.
Let's go along phone.
I appreciate you both being here, Jim Kessler and Rob Waters. Thanks so much for joining us. To learn more about all these stories you heard here this evening, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the Terminal Online.
Thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. Thanks to our great panel. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg.